The wall is beige. The air smells like stale coffee and industrial disinfectant. A man sits across the table in a short-sleeved shirt with a badge clipped to his belt. He doesn't hold a clipboard or a diagnostic manual. He holds a pencil and a blank piece of paper. His job is not to treat. His job is to watch. And for the next 15 years, what he watches will teach him something no university curriculum ever did. You've read the headlines. You've seen the courtroom sketches. You've heard the psychiatrists testify about diminished capacity and antisocial personality disorder. But the man in the beige room sees what happens after the trial, after the diagnosis, when the medication wears off and the ceiling lights hum at exactly 60 hertz and there is nothing left to perform for. Let's start with the surface answer, the one most people know. The official story says violent offenders suffer from recognizable pathologies: psychopathy, borderline personality disorder, intermittent explosive disorder. The brain scans show reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex. The amygdala doesn't light up the way a healthy brain does. The textbooks offer tidy categories, and the system treats them as a sorting mechanism. Put the label on the manila folder, send the man to the appropriate wing, and the problem is contained. But in the beige room, the labels bleed together. A man can be diagnosed as a psychopath in the morning and weep over a photograph of his daughter after lunch. The same inmate who fractured another man's skull with a mop handle will spend hours teaching a younger prisoner how to read. The categories are a convenience for the paperwork. They are not a description of reality. You've seen this for yourself, maybe not in a prison, maybe in a classroom, or an office, or a family gathering. Someone who by every official measure should be toxic, and yet they are the only person who made you feel safe. The categories break. And when they break, you stop trusting anyone who speaks in absolutes about human behavior. That is layer one. The pattern doesn't fit. The prison guard, let's call him what he was, an observer paid minimum wage to sit inside the cage, notices something the psychiatrists never test for. He notices rhythm. Not in the musical sense, a behavioral rhythm, a cycle. The inmates who erupt in violence do not do so randomly. They follow a pattern invisible to the weekly 15-minute consultation, but obvious to someone who watches them for 8 hours straight, 5 days a week, year after year. The rhythm is the same every time. First, a withdrawal. The inmate stops talking, stops making eye contact, stares at a fixed point on the wall. The guards call it going flat. This phase can last hours or days. Then comes the irritability. Small provocations that would go unnoticed become reasons to scream. And then, when the pressure inside the skull becomes unbearable, the violence. A guard struck. A cellmate stabbed with a sharpened toothbrush. A head smashed against concrete. Afterward comes the silence again. And then the apology. And then the genuine confusion. The inmate cannot explain why he did it. He means the apology. He does not remember the rage with any precision. The psychiatrists call this cluster of behaviors impulse control disorder or intermittent explosive disorder. They prescribe mood stabilizers. They write reports. The guard calls it something else. He calls it a pressure cooker with a broken valve. You are now seeing the wiring that the diagnostic manuals miss. If you want to keep tracing these hidden circuits, the real forces that shape violent behavior, subscribe to this channel. And in the comments, tell us the one word that best describes that rhythm you just heard: withdrawal, irritability, or eruption. Which phase do you think is the most telling? Here is where the investigation deepens. Layer 2. What if the problem is not an excess of something inside the brain, but a deficit of something outside it? The guard notices that violence rates in the cell block correlate not with diagnostic categories, but with environmental variables: noise levels, light exposure, the length of time since the last visit from family, the quality of the food, the number of hours of uninterrupted sleep. These are not variables that appear in any psychiatric intake form. They are too mundane, too ordinary, but the guard is not looking for the exotic. He is looking for what works. And what works, he discovers, is not a new medication. It is a schedule. Structure, predictable meals at the same time every day, a window that opens. A guard who uses the same tone of voice regardless of provocation. When these conditions are met, the violent events drop by nearly half. When they are removed, when a shift change brings a new guard who yells, when the plumbing breaks and the cell block goes dark, the violent events spike. The system does not track this. The system tracks recidivism rates and therapy attendance and disciplinary reports. The system is blind to the factor that actually governs behavior. This is the moment the investigation pivots from what is inside the inmate to what is missing from his environment. If you are tracking the evidence with us, subscribe so you do not lose the thread when we go deeper. And in the comments, name the environmental variable you suspect is the most overlooked: noise, light, schedule, or presence. Your observation might be the one the system ignores. Now, peek deeper. Layer 3. The real mechanism. The guard over time begins to see the inmate not as a malfunctioning machine, but as a body responding to a specific kind of starvation. He calls it contact starvation. Not touch exactly, though that's part of it. A starvation for stable, predictable, non-threatening human presence. The kind of presence that in normal development is provided by a caregiver who does not hit you, does not scream at you, does not disappear for days at a time. Most violent offenders grew up without that presence. Their nervous systems were built in an environment where unpredictability was the only constant, and a nervous system built in chaos learns to treat every new stimulus as a potential threat. The guard sees this not as a moral failing. He sees it as a perfectly logical adaptation to a broken childhood. The violence is not the disease. The violence is the symptom of a nervous system that never learned to distinguish between a friend and a predator. This is the insight that changes everything about how we read a violent act. Because if the violence is a symptom, not the disease, then the question shifts from what is wrong with this man to what was done to this child. The man in the beige room begins to trace the rhythm backward, not from the eruption to the trigger, but from the trigger to the first wound. And what he finds is that the timeline of a violent life is almost never random. There is a moment, a specific, documented, often measurable moment when the nervous system switched from developing normally to developing for survival. Sometimes it is visible in the file. A referral to Child Protective Services at age 4, a hospitalization at age 6, a parent incarcerated when the child was 8. But sometimes it is invisible. Never recorded, never reported, existing only in the architecture of the brain itself. The guard learns to read this architecture in the behavior, in the way an inmate flinches at a sudden movement, in the way he cannot sit with his back to the door, in the way his eyes track every person who enters the room, cataloging threats that do not exist. This is not paranoia in the clinical sense. This is a body that learned, before language, before memory, that the world is not safe. And a body that learned that lesson does not unlearn it because a psychiatrist says so. It unlearns it only through years of repeated, predictable, non-threatening presence, which is exactly what the prison system does not provide. Here is where the investigation becomes uncomfortable, because if you follow the logic to its conclusion, you arrive at a truth the justice system cannot afford to admit, that the men in the beige room are not exceptions to humanity. They are the logical product of a system of childhood experience that we allow to continue. The same neighborhoods, the same schools, the same absent fathers and addicted mothers and foster homes that rotate children like inventory. The guard sees it most clearly in the young ones, the ones who arrive at 18 with a life sentence and the emotional regulation of a toddler. They never had a chance. Not because they were born bad, but because their nervous systems were built in a war zone, and then society was surprised when they brought the war with them. That sentence is the key to the entire case file. If it landed for you, subscribe, because we are going to examine exactly how that war zone rewires a child's brain and what that means for prevention. In the comments, write the word that comes to mind when you realize the crime scene is not the first wound. One word. I will read them. You feel the weight of this, don't you? You have read a headline about a teenager who did something unthinkable, and you felt two things simultaneously: horror at the act and a faint, unspoken sense that the story was missing a beginning. The headline starts with the crime. The trial starts with the crime. The sentence starts with the crime. But the nervous system started years before, in a room no one was watching. The man in the beige room watches the young ones arrive, and he knows within the first week which ones will make it and which ones will not. The ones who make it are not the ones with the most therapy or the most medication. The ones who make it are the ones who find one person who looks at them the same way every single day. A guard who doesn't flinch. A teacher in the prison school who doesn't give up. A chaplain who shows up even when the inmate is abusive. One stable point in a life that has known nothing but instability. The ones who do not make it are the ones who never find that point. Their violence escalates. Their sentences lengthen. They become the cases that make the evening news, and the public demands answers, and the experts appear on television to explain that the system failed, and everyone nods, and nobody changes anything. But the guard knows a secret the experts do not. He knows that the solution is not a new law or a new drug or a new diagnostic category. The solution is boring. It is predictability. It is consistency. It is a face that appears at the same time every day and says the same words in the same tone. It is the slow, unglamorous work of teaching a nervous system that the world is not, in fact, trying to kill it. This is the truth the beige room has been whispering for decades. The truth that no politician campaigns on because it does not fit into a soundbite. It does not fit into a promise of tougher sentencing or more police on the streets. It is not dramatic. It is not satisfying. It is not something you can legislate into existence overnight. What it is evidence. The guard does not write a book. He does not give a TED Talk. He retires, collects his pension, and disappears into a life that no one documents. But the data he collected in his head, the pattern he saw, the rhythm he tracked, that data is real. And it has been replicated quietly in other beige rooms across the country by other guards who noticed the same thing, men and women who were never trained to see, but who saw anyway. The official system continues to miss it. The diagnostic manuals get thicker, the prisons get fuller, the headlines get louder. And in every new intake, a nervous system that learned to fear the world before it learned to speak gets processed, labeled, medicated, and forgotten. But you know now. You know that the violence is not the beginning of the story. You know that the crime scene is not the first wound. You know that the man in the beige room with his pencil and his blank piece of paper understood something that the entire institution built around him could not see. And that knowledge changes one thing: how you read the next headline.